Texas, 1875. Dust settled on the wide plank floors of the rampaging Bull Saloon like powdered gold in the last rays of daylight. Every board in the old place seemed to tell a story, and most of those tales were embellished, forgotten, or outright lies. But there was one story the saloon knew by heart, one that had unfolded beneath its roof and spread across the frontier town of Whisper Creek like wildfire. It was the story of Nathaniel, Zane, and Sarah Newcomb. In the corner of the saloon, Nathaniel sat alone, his lean frame hunched over a glass of whiskey. At 26, he carried himself with the weathered confidence of a man twice his age. The cattle drive from San Antonio had been brutal, 3 men lost crossing the Brazos, 200 heads scattered in a midnight storm. But they had made it, and tomorrow the men would collect their pay and scatter like tumbleweeds. Nathaniel ran his finger along the rim of his glass. His hands were calloused but clean, his face freshly washed though bearing the shadow of a day's stubble across a strong jawline. Sandy brown hair fell just above eyes the color of a summer sky. Unlike most of the cowboys celebrating around him, Nathaniel had no plans to waste his earnings on cards, whiskey, and women. The frontier had taught him one immutable truth: attachment was dangerous. Love was for fools who hadn't seen what he had seen. The only safety lay in moving on before roots could grow, before people could matter too much. His parents' homestead had burned in a raid when he was 14. His first sweetheart had died of fever at 17. The trail boss who'd been like a father to him had taken a bullet in a cattle rustling 2 years back. No, Nathaniel Zane knew better than to stay anywhere too long. His saddlebags were already packed for the morning ride out. "Another," he called to the barkeep, sliding his empty glass forward. The saloon doors swung open and heads turned. Sarah Newcomb stepped inside, her presence silencing the rowdy establishment like a church bell on Sunday morning. At 22, she moved with the quiet dignity of a woman who had seen both joy and sorrow. Her honey-blonde hair was swept up in a neat arrangement, though rebellious tendrils framed her face. Her dress was simple but well-made, dark blue calico that emphasized the remarkable green of her eyes. Sarah Newcomb, the widow. Her husband of less than a year, Thomas Newcomb, had been killed in a mine collapse just 6 months prior. The town still whispered about the tragedy, how the young bride had arrived from Boston only weeks before the accident, how she had shocked everyone by choosing to stay rather than return east. She had opened a small millinery shop, supporting herself with skilled hands that crafted bonnets and hats sought after by every woman in 3 counties. But it was her quiet resilience that earned respect even among the hard men of the frontier. "Mrs. Newcomb," the barkeep nodded respectfully, "your order's ready in the back." "Thank you, Mr. Holloway," she replied, her voice carrying the slightest remnant of an Eastern accent. Nathaniel found himself watching her, noting how conversations resumed in her wake but with more restraint. The widow commanded respect without demanding it, a rare quality in the untamed West. Their eyes met briefly across the saloon, and for a moment Nathaniel felt something he couldn't name, something that made him want to straighten his posture and remove his hat. He did neither, merely nodding slightly before returning his attention to his whiskey. Sarah collected her package from the back room, supplies that would be improper for a lady to purchase directly from the general store. As she turned to leave, a drunken cowboy stumbled into her path, spilling amber liquid across her sleeve. "Well now, pretty lady," the man slurred, reaching for her waist. "Let me help you clean that." Before the man could finish, Nathaniel was there, his movement so fluid it seemed he'd materialized between them. "The lady is leaving," he said quietly, his hand gently but firmly moving the drunk aside. "I don't need," Sarah began. "I know you don't," Nathaniel replied without looking at her, his eyes fixed on the cowboy who was weighing his options and finding them wanting. "But he does need reminding of his manners." The drunk cowboy squinted, recognition slowly dawning. "Zane, didn't know you was back in town." "Just passing through," Nathaniel answered. "Same as always." The drunk mumbled something unintelligible before shuffling back to his table. Nathaniel stepped aside, careful not to crowd the widow. "Thank you, mister," Sarah said, her green eyes studying his face with unexpected directness. "Zane, Nathaniel Zane." "Thank you, Mr. Zane, although I assure you I've learned to manage such situations." "I don't doubt it, Mrs. Newcomb." His use of her name surprised her. "A woman running her own business in Whisper Creek would have to." She tilted her head slightly. You know who I am." "Everyone knows who you are." He offered nothing further. Sarah adjusted her package against her hip. "Well, Mr. Zane, thank you again for your intervention, unnecessary though it may have been. Good evening." As she moved toward the door, Nathaniel returned to his table, aware of eyes following both of them. The whispers had already begun. He drained his whiskey and considered ordering another, but something had shifted. The need to numb himself had mysteriously faded. Outside, Sarah paused on the boardwalk, inhaling the cooling evening air. The encounter had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. There had been something in the cowboy's eyes, not the usual pity she received from townsfolk, nor the predatory interest some men showed a young widow. It had been recognition of a sort. As though he had seen in her what she saw in her mirror each morning, a person determined to stand alone because standing together had proven too costly. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Nathaniel saddled his horse behind the livery stable, mentally charting his course north toward Wyoming. A ranch there was hiring experienced hands, and winter would be easier with a roof overhead. "Heading out already, Nate?" The livery owner, old Jim Pratt, leaned against the doorframe. "Thought the boys were celebrating their pay today." "Got somewhere to be," Nathaniel replied, tightening the cinch. "You always do," Jim chuckled. Never known a man so afraid of sitting still. Nathaniel didn't respond, just checked his saddlebags methodically. "Saw you stepped in when Carter got handsy with the widow last night," Jim continued, undeterred. "That woman's got more grit than half the men in this town. Turned down 3 marriage proposals already. Says she's not interested in being anyone's project or property." Despite himself, Nathaniel smiled slightly. "Smart woman." "Smart, yes, but lonely road she's choosing, same as some others I could mention." Jim gave him a pointed look. "Some roads are meant to be traveled alone, Jim." "If you say so." The older man straightened up. "Oh, nearly forgot your bay threw a shoe yesterday. Fixed it, but you might want to have it checked in Copper Springs. That front right's always been trouble." Nathaniel nodded his thanks and led his horse around to the street. He planned to stop at the general store for supplies before leaving town. As he approached, he noticed a crowd gathered outside the bank across the street. A man was shouting, and several women huddled together, watching anxiously. Curiosity got the better of him. Nathaniel tied his horse and crossed toward the commotion. "Absolutely disgraceful," a red-faced man in an expensive suit was saying. "The bank has extended every possible courtesy, Mrs. Newcomb. 6 months of patience is more than generous for an unsecured loan." Sarah Newcomb stood before him, spine straight as a ramrod. "Mr. Hargrove, I have paid the interest faithfully every month. I simply need additional time to arrange for the principal." "The terms were clear," Hargrove said, his voice carrying for the benefit of the audience. "Your husband borrowed against future mining profits that never materialized. The bank has shareholders to consider." "I understand that," Sarah replied evenly. "I'm only asking for 3 more months. The spring orders alone will." "The matter is closed. You have until the end of the week to vacate the premises, both commercial and residential. The bank will reclaim the property and settle the debt through auction." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Sarah's home and shop were being foreclosed. The young widow would lose everything. Nathaniel found himself moving forward before he'd consciously decided to intervene. "What's the amount owed?" he asked, his voice cutting through the murmurs. All heads turned. Hargrove looked irritated at the interruption. "This is a private matter between Mrs. Newcomb and Whisper Creek Bank." "That you're discussing in the middle of the street," Nathaniel observed dryly. "What's the amount?" "Mr. Zane, please," Sarah said quietly. "This isn't your concern." $342, Hargrove stated smugly, plus outstanding interest. A substantial sum, more than a cowhand made in a year. Nathaniel had barely half that in his saddlebags, his earnings from 3 cattle drives. "I'll cover it," he heard himself say. The words seemed to come from somewhere outside himself. Sarah's eyes widened. "Mr. Zane, I'll need until noon to gather the full amount," Nathaniel continued, ignoring her protest. "You'll have your money, Hargrove." The banker's expression wavered between skepticism and greed. "The bank opens at 9. I'll expect you then." He turned and retreated into the building. The crowd dispersed slowly, conversation buzzing. Sarah stared at Nathaniel, color high in her cheeks. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded when they were relatively alone. Buying you time, he answered simply, with money you don't have, from what I gathered. I have some, the rest I can get. Why? Her green eyes searched his face. You don't know me, Mr. Zane. You're just passing through, as you said yourself. Nathaniel wasn't entirely sure of the answer himself. Maybe I don't like seeing Hargrove bully a woman who's trying to stand on her own. So this is chivalry. Rescue the widow, her voice carried an edge. I don't need saving, Mr. Zane. I've been finding my own way. With respect, Mrs. Newcomb, finding your own way has led to being $300 in debt with nowhere to turn. He softened his tone. Consider it a business arrangement. You can repay me when your shop turns a profit. Sarah looked skeptical. And if my shop never turns that kind of profit, you'll be long gone by then anyway. Then I'll have done one decent thing before I leave, he replied simply. Something in his earnest response seemed to reach her. The defensive set of her shoulders eased slightly. I can't accept charity. It's not charity, it's an investment, he gestured toward her shop. I've seen the ladies around here wearing your creations. You have skill. Skill deserves a chance to find its market. Sarah was silent for a long moment. I would insist on proper terms, interest, repayment schedule. Everything in writing. Of course. And I would need to know why, the real reason. Her gaze was unwavering. No man parts with his hard-earned money without cause, Mr. Zane. Nathaniel considered how much truth to offer. My mother taught me that debts aren't always about money, he said finally. Sometimes they're about balancing scales that have nothing to do with the people standing before you. Understanding flickered in her eyes. You're trying to help someone who isn't here anymore. He didn't confirm or deny it. Shall we discuss those terms, Mrs. Newcomb? By noon, Nathaniel had secured the remaining funds through the sale of his horse, and some creative wagering in the back room of the saloon, where a high-stakes poker game had been underway since dawn. He wasn't proud of the latter, but his skill with cards had always been reliable. The debt was settled, much to Hargrove's poorly concealed disappointment. The banker had clearly been anticipating acquiring Sarah's prime storefront property at a fraction of its worth. Sarah insisted Nathaniel come to her home that evening to formalize their arrangement. I'll provide supper, she said, in a tone that brooked no argument. It's the least I can do, considering. Her home was attached to the rear of her shop, a modest but well-kept two-room structure with a small kitchen garden visible through the back window. Inside, everything was immaculately organized and surprisingly comfortable for a frontier dwelling. Books lined one wall, unusual for most Western households, and carefully preserved dried flowers hung in small bunches from the rafters. You've made it feel like somewhere else, Nathaniel observed, standing awkwardly in the center of the main room while Sarah added final touches to their meal. Not entirely by design, she admitted. Most of these things were shipped from Boston. I arrived with 12 trunks, if you can imagine. Thomas thought it terribly impractical. Was he right? Sarah smiled faintly. Partly, but these familiar things kept me sane after, she gestured vaguely. Well, after everything changed. The meal was simple but well prepared, a chicken stew with dumplings, fresh bread, and preserved peaches for dessert. As they ate, Sarah produced a carefully written agreement for their financial arrangement. 3 years, she explained, indicating the terms. With 5% interest annually. I'll make monthly payments as I'm able, with the full amount due by June of 1878. Nathaniel scanned the document. And if you're unable to pay by then you would have the right to claim equivalent value from my business assets, she said practically. Though I assure you, Mr. Zane, I intend to honor this debt. He signed without further comment, then passed the paper back to her. You're not worried about collection? She asked, surprised by his casualness. You mentioned Wyoming earlier. That's a fair distance for sending payments. I'm not headed to Wyoming anymore, he replied, surprising himself again. Seems I've found myself temporarily without a horse. Because of me, her expression softened with guilt. Because of my choice, he corrected. Besides, Whisper Creek seems as good a place as any to spend the winter. The sawmill is hiring. I've worked lumber before. The real reason for his change of plans remained unspoken between them. They both knew he was staying to ensure his investment in her business and in her future. Why did you stay? Nathaniel asked suddenly. After your husband died, most Eastern women would have returned home. Sarah was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of her water glass with one finger. Home wasn't home anymore, she finally answered. My parents passed within months of each other before I married Thomas. There was nothing to go back to except memories and distant relatives who had already divided my parents' belongings amongst themselves. She looked up at him, and there was something about proving I could survive here, that I wasn't just Thomas's fragile Eastern bride who needed protecting from frontier realities. Is that how he saw you? A complex emotion crossed her face. Thomas wanted something he could safeguard, someone who needed him desperately. I disappointed him by adapting too well. The honesty of her answer created a moment of unexpected intimacy between them. Nathaniel found himself sharing in return. My father was the same with my mother, he said quietly. Brought her to a homestead in Indian Territory, thinking her delicate Boston upbringing would make her dependent on him forever. By year 3, she was trading with the local tribes better than he ever could, and had cultivated crops he'd claimed would never grow in that soil. Sarah smiled. She sounds remarkable. She was, the familiar pain surfaced with the memory. They both were. What happened to them? She asked gently. Raid, I was 14. His expression closed slightly. I was hunting. Came back to smoke and bodies. I'm sorry, her hand moved across the table, not quite touching his. That explains why you don't get attached to places. Or people, he added, more sharply than intended. If she was offended by his tone, she didn't show it. Yet here you are, Mr. Zane, significantly poorer for having helped a virtual stranger. Here I am, he echoed, uncertain how to explain his own actions. As autumn settled over Whisper Creek, Nathaniel found work at the sawmill and took a room at the boarding house run by a formidable widow named Mrs. Templeton. He developed a routine that included breakfast at the town's only cafe, long hours of physical labor, and evenings mostly spent alone, reading books borrowed from the small collection at the general store. Occasionally, he would stop by Sarah's shop to check on his investment, as they both referred to their arrangement. These visits began as awkward, brief exchanges, but gradually evolved into more comfortable conversations as they discovered shared interests in literature and surprising common ground despite their different backgrounds. Sarah's business improved steadily. Her practical winter bonnets sold well among the local women, but it was her special occasion pieces that began drawing customers from neighboring towns. Women would travel considerable distances for a Sarah Newcomb creation to wear to church socials and holiday gatherings. You should consider displaying at the territorial fair next spring, Nathaniel suggested during one of his visits in early November. Buyers from Denver and Santa Fe attend. You could establish connections for larger orders. Sarah looked up from the emerald green silk she was shaping over a wooden form. That's actually quite insightful, Mr. Zane. I hadn't considered markets beyond our immediate region. Cattle taught me that, he replied with a slight smile. The best profits come from getting your product to the hungriest markets, not just the closest ones. I'm hardly driving my hats to Kansas City, she laughed. No, but the principle stands. He leaned against her workbench, watching her skilled fingers manipulate the delicate material. Your work is better than anything I saw in Denver last year. People would pay premium prices. She paused, studying him. You have a good eye for business, Mr. Zane. I wouldn't have expected that from. A saddled tramp, he finished wryly. I was going to say from someone who avoids putting down roots, she corrected. Business requires commitment to place. Not necessarily. Some of the wealthiest men I've known conduct their affairs from horseback, investing in opportunities across territories. Is that what you aspire to? Becoming a wealthy investor, her question held genuine curiosity. Nathaniel considered it. Never thought that far ahead, honestly. Always been about having enough to make it to the next season. That's survival, not living, Sarah observed quietly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition that they were both experts in survival but novices at truly living. The moment was broken by the entrance of Judith Palmer, the doctor's wife, come to collect a hat ordered for her anniversary celebration. As Nathaniel moved to leave, Sarah called after him. Mrs. Templeton's boarding house is hosting a Thanksgiving dinner for those without family nearby, she said. I'll be attending. Perhaps you might consider it as well. Perhaps, he answered noncommittally, though the invitation warmed him more than he cared to admit. 2 days later, Whisper Creek faced its first winter crisis. Heavy rains had swollen the creek that gave the town its name, threatening the lower buildings, including the livery and general store. Every able-bodied man was recruited to reinforce the banks with sandbags and divert the water's flow where possible. Nathaniel worked tirelessly alongside the townsmen, his strength and experience proving valuable as they fought against the rising waters. By nightfall, they had managed to prevent major damage, though several storage sheds had been lost to the current. Exhausted and soaked to the skin, Nathaniel was making his way back to the boarding house when he noticed light still glowing in Sarah's shop. Concerned, he changed direction and knocked at her door. Sarah answered immediately as though she'd been waiting. "Mr. Zane, I heard you've been with the sandbagging crew since dawn." She ushered him inside without hesitation. "You're drenched. Come sit by the stove before you catch your death." "I'm fine, Mrs. Newcomb. Just wanted to make sure you weren't having any trouble with the water." His teeth chattered slightly, betraying his words. "My property sits high enough to be safe," she assured him, already moving to pour coffee from a pot kept warm on the stove. "But you clearly need warming up." Too tired to argue, Nathaniel accepted both the coffee and the chair she offered. The warmth from the stove began to seep into his chilled bones. "The whole town's talking about how you organized the crew at Prescott's warehouse," Sarah said, handing him a towel for his dripping hair. "Saved most of his inventory from what I heard." Nathaniel shrugged, "Seen my share of floods. Just applied common sense." "You consistently undervalue your contributions, Mr. Zane." There was a touch of admonishment in her tone. "Habit," he admitted, "comes from preferring to remain unremarkable." "Why would anyone prefer that?" He took a long sip of coffee before answering. "Remarkable people get remembered. Remembered people get expected to stay." Sarah sat across from him, her own cup cradled between her hands. "And that's still what frightens you most. Being expected to stay somewhere." "Not frightened," he corrected, "just practical." "Is it practical to deny yourself connection, community?" Her green eyes studied him intently. "From what I've observed, you're more integrated with this town after 2 months than I managed in my first 6. Different circumstances." "Yes," she agreed. "I arrived with a husband and a position." "You arrived intending to leave the next day, yet here we sit." Something about her directness, combined with his physical exhaustion, broke through Nathaniel's usual reserve. "My parents built something permanent," he said quietly. "A home. A future, it made them targets." "So you've spent 12 years ensuring you're never a target," she concluded. "Never building anything that can't be abandoned at a moment's notice." Put so plainly, his life philosophy suddenly seemed less practical and more hollow. Nathaniel stared into his coffee cup, unable to meet her gaze. "I apologize," Sarah said, her tone softening. "That was presumptuous of me." "No," he replied, finally looking up. "It was accurate." The simple admission hung between them, creating an opening neither was quite ready to step through. Instead, Sarah rose and fetched him another towel. "You should get back to Mrs. Templeton's and into dry clothes," she said gently. "Thank you for checking on me." Nathaniel nodded, returning the empty coffee cup. At the door he paused. "About Thanksgiving dinner." Sarah's expression brightened slightly. "Yes, I'll be there," he said simply. The Thanksgiving gathering at Mrs. Templeton's boarding house brought together a surprising cross-section of Whisper Creek society. There were the permanent bachelors who had never married, widows and widowers, newcomers without family nearby, and a handful of drifters who had found temporary work in town. Nathaniel arrived early to help with preparations, earning an approving nod from Mrs. Templeton, a stern woman with unexpected warmth beneath her businesslike exterior. "Good to see a man who knows his way around a kitchen," she commented as he efficiently peeled potatoes. "Most of these cowboys think food appears by magic." "My mother wouldn't allow it," Nathaniel explained. "Said any man who expected to eat should know how to prepare what he hunted." "Wise woman," Mrs. Templeton approved. Sarah arrived carrying 2 freshly baked pies and wearing a dress Nathaniel hadn't seen before, a deep russet color that complemented her honey-blonde hair and brought warmth to her complexion. She looked younger somehow, less the determined widow and more the young woman she truly was. Their eyes met across the busy kitchen, and she offered a genuine smile that he couldn't help but return. Something had shifted between them since their conversation in her shop, a new honesty that made their interactions both more comfortable and more charged with unspoken possibility. The meal was abundant and joyful, the long table filled with conversation and laughter. Nathaniel found himself seated beside Sarah, their shoulders occasionally brushing as dishes were passed. Each casual contact sent an awareness through him that both unsettled and exhilarated. "I received an inquiry from a merchant in Denver," Sarah told him quietly during a lull in the general conversation. "He saw one of my hats on a customer and wants to discuss a standing order for his shop." "That's excellent news," Nathaniel replied, genuinely pleased. "Did he mention what styles interested him?" "The more elaborate designs," she said, "which would mean better profit margins. You'll need to consider your production capacity. One woman can only create so many pieces by hand." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I've been considering taking on an apprentice. Margaret Wilson's daughter has shown real aptitude." "Planning for expansion," Nathaniel observed with a smile. "A true businesswoman." "With a good advisor," she added, her eyes meeting his with unguarded warmth. Later, as the gathering transitioned from dining to socialization, Nathaniel found himself drawn into a conversation about the spring cattle drives with several of the local ranchers. His extensive experience and thoughtful insights impressed the older men, who began suggesting he consider a more permanent position with one of their operations. "Patterson's foreman is retiring come April," Jacob Thornton, the largest rancher in the region, mentioned casually. "Man who knows cattle the way you do would be valuable in that role." "I appreciate the thought," Nathaniel replied noncommittally, though he couldn't deny the offer's appeal. Foreman positions were coveted for their stability and status. Across the room, he noticed Sarah engaged in animated conversation with the doctor's wife and several other prominent town women. They appeared to be discussing something that required hand gestures indicating measurements and designs. Sarah's face was alight with enthusiasm, her natural grace drawing attention even among the well-dressed society women. She belonged here, he realized. In 2 years, she had transformed from the outsider widow to a respected businesswoman integrated into the community. Her determination had carved her a place that was uniquely hers. The thought was both inspiring and unsettling. What would it mean to belong somewhere by choice rather than circumstance? To build something that couldn't be packed on a horse at a moment's notice? As if sensing his thoughts, Sarah glanced his way, their eyes connecting across the crowded room. She offered a small, private smile before returning her attention to her conversation. That night, walking her home through the crisp November air, Nathaniel felt more at peace than he had in years. "It was a lovely gathering," Sarah commented, her breath visible in the cold. "Mrs. Templeton has a gift for making disparate people feel like family." "A valuable skill on the frontier," Nathaniel agreed. "Communities survive where individuals might not." "Is that why you've avoided them?" she asked, her question gentle rather than challenging. "Communities, I mean." Nathaniel considered his answer carefully, partly. But also because belonging means becoming necessary to others, creating obligations that can't be abandoned without causing pain. "And you prefer causing yourself pain by remaining alone to risking causing pain to others by potentially leaving." Her insight was uncomfortably accurate. "When you say it that way, it sounds noble rather than cowardly." "I don't think it's either," Sarah replied. "I think it's a response to trauma. We all protect ourselves in different ways after loss." They had reached her door, but neither seemed eager to end the conversation. "How did you protect yourself?" he asked. Sarah's expression grew contemplative in the moonlight. "By proving I didn't need anyone, that I could stand alone," she smiled faintly. "Not so different from your method, just less mobile." The parallel between them hung in the air, creating a moment of profound connection. Impulsively, Nathaniel reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gently enfolding hers. "Thank you for encouraging me to attend tonight," he said, his voice lower than intended. "It's been a long time since I felt part of something." "Good." Sarah's fingers tightened slightly around his. Thank you for staying long enough to attend, she replied softly. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Finally, Nathaniel reluctantly released her hand and stepped back. Good night, Mrs. Newcomb. Sarah, she corrected. After sharing Thanksgiving dinner, I think first names are permitted, Nathaniel. The sound of his name on her lips sent a warmth through him that had nothing to do with the evening's wine. Good night, Sarah. Good night, Nathaniel. As December brought the first heavy snow to Whisper Creek, life settled into a winter rhythm. The sawmill operated at reduced capacity, giving Nathaniel more free time than he was accustomed to having. He filled some hours helping neighbors repair storm damage or chop firewood for elderly residents, actions that further integrated him into the community fabric. His evenings increasingly included visits to Sarah's shop, ostensibly to discuss business matters, but evolving into wide-ranging conversations about books, childhood memories, and observations about frontier life. They were careful to maintain propriety, always meeting in the public portion of her shop rather than her living quarters, and never so late as to cause gossip. Nevertheless, the town noticed. The story of how Nathaniel had intervened with the bank on Sarah's behalf had spread, embellished with each retelling. Some versions cast him as a mysterious benefactor with hidden wealth. Others suggested a romantic arrangement that both parties would have found mortifying had they heard. The truth, that two lonely people had found unexpected understanding in each other, was both simpler and more profound than town gossip could capture. We're being talked about, Sarah mentioned one evening as they reviewed her account books. The Christmas season had brought a surge in orders, improving her financial position considerably. Nathaniel glanced up from the ledger. Does that bother you? It should, she admitted. A widow's reputation is a fragile thing, but I find I'm more concerned with reality than perception these days. And what is the reality as you see it? He asked cautiously. Sarah met his gaze directly. That I've found a friend when I wasn't looking for one, that our arrangement has evolved into something beneficial beyond financial terms. She hesitated before adding, that I look forward to your visits more than is probably wise. The honest admission hung between them, neither advancing nor retreating from its implications. The Christmas Eve gathering at the church, Nathaniel said finally. Would you consider attending with me? The question was significant. Appearing together at a community event would make a public statement about their association. Yes, Sarah answered without hesitation. I would like that very much. The Christmas Eve service was a highlight of Whisper Creek's social calendar. The small church was transformed with evergreen boughs, candles, and red ribbons. Families arrived in their finest clothes, and even the most hardened cowboys cleaned up and attended with uncharacteristic reverence. When Nathaniel appeared at Sarah's door to escort her, he presented a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. It isn't much, he said, suddenly self-conscious, but I wanted you to have something for Christmas. Sarah accepted it with surprise, but I haven't prepared anything for you. That wasn't my expectation, he assured her. Please open it. Inside the package was a small wooden box, expertly crafted from polished pine with intricate carved patterns around the edges. The top featured an inlaid design of wildflowers. It's beautiful, she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth surface. Did you make this? Nathaniel nodded. Been working on it during evenings. The mill owner let me use some scrap wood and tools. Sarah opened the hinged lid to reveal a velvet-lined interior, perfectly sized to hold sewing notions or jewelry. This is too fine a gift for a mere business associate, she said, her eyes shining with emotion. I haven't thought of you as merely that for some time now, he replied quietly. The church service was beautiful, filled with carols and readings by candlelight. Sarah and Nathaniel sat close together, their shoulders touching in the crowded pew. When they joined hands during the final prayer, it felt like the most natural action in the world. Afterward, they walked slowly through the snowy streets toward Sarah's home, neither rushing to end the evening. What was Christmas like for you growing up? Sarah asked, her arm linked through his. Simple but meaningful, Nathaniel recalled. My father would hunt a special game bird. My mother would make her secret recipe apple pie. We'd exchange one gift each, something useful but personal. He smiled at the memory. My last Christmas with them, I received a hunting knife with my initials carved in the handle. I still have it. That sounds lovely, Sarah said warmly. Boston Christmases were more elaborate affairs, parties, and formal dinners. But my favorite moments were always the quiet ones with just my parents, sitting by the fire after everyone had left. They reached her door too soon. Snowflakes caught in Sarah's hair, glittering like tiny stars in the lamplight. "I have something for you after all," she said suddenly, reaching up to unpin a small brooch from her collar. "It was my father's tie pin. I had it converted to a brooch after he passed, but I think he would want you to have it." The simple silver piece featured a compass design, the needle pointing true north. Nathaniel accepted it with profound emotion, understanding the significance of her parting with such a personal memento. "Sarah, I can't." "Please," she interrupted gently. For a man who has spent his life finding directions, it seemed appropriate. Their eyes held, and Nathaniel felt the last of his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. Without conscious thought, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss as soft as the falling snow around them. Sarah responded with equal gentleness, her hand resting lightly on his chest. When they separated, her eyes remained closed for a moment, as though preserving the sensation. "I should go," Nathaniel whispered, though everything in him resisted the idea. "Yes," she agreed, equally reluctant. "Propriety demands it." He brushed a snowflake from her cheek. "Merry Christmas, Sarah." "Merry Christmas, Nathaniel." As he walked back to the boarding house, the compass pin secure in his pocket, Nathaniel realized with startling clarity that for the first time in 12 years, he had no desire to be anywhere but exactly where he was. The new year brought change to Whisper Creek. A telegraph line finally connected the growing town to Denver, bringing news from the outside world with unprecedented speed. Sarah's business continued to flourish, with her Denver connection ordering a dozen hats monthly. She had indeed taken on young Emily Wilson as an apprentice, teaching the girl 3 afternoons each week. Nathaniel had accepted additional responsibilities at the sawmill, essentially serving as foreman though without the official title or full compensation. The owner, Elias Jenkins, had hinted that a more permanent arrangement might be forthcoming in the spring. The winter deepened their relationship through shared experiences, skating on the frozen pond with other townspeople, attending community dances, and continuing their evening conversations. They were careful to observe the proprieties that frontier society demanded, especially given Sarah's status as a widow, but there was no disguising the growing attachment between them. By February, Nathaniel had begun tentatively imagining a future in Whisper Creek. He found himself noticing available properties on the town's outskirts, mentally calculating costs and improvements. When Jacob Thornton repeated his offer of the foreman position, Nathaniel promised to give it serious consideration rather than his usual noncommittal response. These small shifts represented monumental change for a man who had spent adulthood avoiding attachment to people and places. The town noticed, watching with approval as the drifting cowboy who had defended the widow's honor became a respected community member who might be contemplating something permanent with said widow. "You're different, Mrs. Templeton observed one evening as Nathaniel sat on the boarding house porch, whittling a small wooden figure, a gift for Sarah's upcoming birthday. "Got the look of a man putting down roots." "Maybe," Nathaniel allowed, unwilling to fully commit even to the observation. "She's a fine woman," the landlady continued. "Deserves happiness after what she's been through." Nathaniel's hands stilled. What exactly has she been through, Mrs. Templeton, beyond the obvious loss of her husband? The older woman gave him a measured look. "Not my place to say more than what's common knowledge, but marriages aren't always what they appear from outside." She rose from her rocking chair. "Just remember that people carry invisible wounds sometimes. Healing takes patience." The cryptic comment lingered in Nathaniel's mind as he completed the carving, a small bird in flight, its wings extended in freedom. Valentine's Day brought unexpected excitement to Whisper Creek. Sarah received a large order from a San Francisco merchant who had seen her work on a visitor to that city. The potential for expanding to California markets represented a significant opportunity, one that would require additional help and possibly even larger premises. "This could change everything," she told Nathaniel excitedly as they shared coffee in her shop after closing. "A regular San Francisco connection would mean stability, growth." "You've earned it," Nathaniel replied warmly. Your work is exceptional. It was only a matter of time before wider markets discovered you. Sarah's expression turned thoughtful. It's strange to think that what began as necessity has become something more. When Thomas died, I only wanted to survive. I never imagined building something that could thrive. Life has a way of surprising us, Nathaniel agreed, thinking of his own unexpected journey. Speaking of surprises, Sarah reached beneath the counter and produced a small package wrapped in red paper. Happy Valentine's Day. Nathaniel accepted it with genuine surprise. I didn't realize we were exchanging gifts for the occasion. It isn't customary, she acknowledged with a slight blush, but I wanted to mark the day. Inside the package was a finely crafted leather wallet, the exterior embossed with his initials. It's perfect, he said, genuinely touched. Thank you. Open it, she encouraged. Inside, tucked into one compartment, was a small photograph, a tintype of Sarah, taken recently by the traveling photographer who had visited town the previous month. She was smiling slightly, her expression containing a warmth rarely captured in such formal portraits. So you have something to remember me by, she explained, suddenly seeming uncertain. If your travels should ever take you away from Whisper Creek. The gift's dual nature, practical for his present life, sentimental for his former wandering one, touched Nathaniel deeply. It acknowledged both who he had been and who he was becoming. I have something for you as well, he admitted, reaching into his pocket. Though it wasn't planned for today specifically. He handed her the carved wooden bird, its details refined through many evenings of patient work. Sarah cradled it in her palm, studying the intricate feathers and the bird's expression of joyful flight. It's exquisite, she whispered. What kind of bird is it? A swallow, Nathaniel answered. They return to the same nests year after year, no matter how far they travel. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. Their eyes met in understanding of what remained unspoken between them, the possibility of permanence, of choosing to return, of building something lasting together. Nathaniel, she began, her voice soft with emotion. The moment was shattered by the sudden crash of the shop door flying open. Hargrove, the banker, stood in the doorway, his face contorted with rage and alcohol. So the rumors are true, he slurred, glaring at their intimate tableau. The widow and the drifter. How convenient that he appeared just when you needed money, Mrs. Newcomb. Makes a man wonder what services were exchanged. Nathaniel was on his feet instantly. You're drunk, Hargrove. Go home before you say something you'll regret. Regret, the banker laughed bitterly. The only regret is mine for not seeing through her act sooner, the grieving widow so dedicated to her dead husband's memory. Meanwhile, she's entertaining men after dark. Sarah stood calmly, though her face had paled. Mr. Hargrove, you are trespassing in my place of business. Please leave immediately. Your business, he spat, built on what? Everyone knows Newcomb was nearly bankrupt when he died. Where did the starting capital really come from, I wonder? The same place you got the loan repayment, he leered at her. Or perhaps you've always had wealthy admirers. Newcomb certainly thought so. Nathaniel moved forward, placing himself between Sarah and the banker. That's enough. Leave now, or I'll remove you myself. Hargrove sneered. Defending your investment, Zane, or is it something else you're protecting? He directed his next words at Sarah. Did you tell him about the letters, Mrs. Newcomb, about why your husband really went into that mine that day? The color drained completely from Sarah's face. How dare you, she whispered. What letters? Nathaniel asked, looking between them. Ask her, Hargrove taunted. Ask her who she was writing to back east while her husband was working himself to death. Ask her why Thomas was so desperate for a big strike that he ignored basic safety. Nathaniel's restraint snapped. He grabbed the banker by his coat lapels and physically removed him from the shop, depositing him unceremoniously in the street. If you ever speak to or about Mrs. Newcomb disrespectfully again, he said in a dangerously quiet voice, you'll answer to me. Is that perfectly clear? Something in Nathaniel's expression sobered the banker slightly. He scrambled to his feet, adjusting his rumpled clothing. This isn't over, he muttered, but retreated nonetheless. When Nathaniel returned to the shop, Sarah was standing exactly where he'd left her, her face ashen and her hands trembling slightly. Sarah, he approached cautiously, are you all right? She seemed to return from somewhere far away, her eyes refocusing on his face. You should go, she said, her voice unnaturally steady. I'm not leaving you like this, he protested. What Hargrove said. Please, she interrupted, something fragile in her tone. I need to be alone right now. Nathaniel hesitated, torn between respecting her wishes and his concern for her obvious distress. Will you at least tell me what he meant about the letters? Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Not tonight, I can't, I need time. All right, he conceded reluctantly. But I'll come by tomorrow to check on you. She nodded without meeting his gaze, already turning away. The wooden bird remained on the counter between them, its wings frozen in perpetual flight. Nathaniel left, deeply troubled by both Hargrove's accusations and Sarah's reaction to them. He spent a restless night pondering what secrets might lie in her past and whether they would change what had grown between them. The next morning brought unwelcome answers. Nathaniel arrived at Sarah's shop to find it closed, a simple note pinned to the door, "Gone to Denver on business, will return next week." She had fled rather than face him with the truth, whatever that truth might be. The saloon buzzed that evening with gossip about Hargrove's public confrontation and Sarah's sudden departure. Nathaniel sat alone at the bar, nursing a single whiskey and trying to ignore the speculative glances cast his way. Mighty convenient timing, a voice commented nearby, loud enough to carry. Woman gets accused of something unsavory, disappears the next day. Hargrove was drunk, another defended. Probably talking nonsense. Maybe, a third voice chimed in, but Newcomb did die under strange circumstances. Always did wonder why he was in that unstable section alone. And where did she get the money to start that fancy hat business? Eastern widow with no family support. Nathaniel's knuckles whitened around his glass. He was contemplating intervention when an unexpected ally appeared. You boys got nothing better to discuss than the business of a respectable widow, Mrs. Templeton's authoritative voice cut through the murmurs. She fixed the gossipers with a stern glare. Thomas Newcomb was a proud man with poor judgment who took risks to prove himself. His death was investigated thoroughly by Sheriff Mason. If that's not good enough for you, perhaps you should volunteer for law enforcement instead of wagging your tongues. The chastised men muttered apologies and shifted to other topics. Mrs. Templeton caught Nathaniel's eye briefly before departing, her expression conveying both sympathy and caution. Later that night, restless and troubled, Nathaniel found himself walking past Sarah's darkened shop. A movement near the rear of the building caught his attention, a shadowy figure slipping around the back entrance. Instinctively, he followed, moving silently as he'd learned hunting in his youth. The figure Hargrove, he realized with mounting anger, was attempting to force the back door with a pry bar. Looking for something? Nathaniel asked coldly, stepping into view. Hargrove startled violently, dropping the tool. Zane. What are you doing here? Protecting property that belongs to a friend, Nathaniel replied, advancing slowly. Unlike you, who appears to be attempting burglary. You don't understand, the banker said urgently. There are papers, evidence. She'll destroy them when she returns. Evidence of what? That she was unfaithful, that she drove Thomas to his death with her betrayal. Hargrove's voice held a strange intensity. He was my friend. He deserves justice. Nathaniel studied the man with sudden clarity. He was more than your friend, wasn't he? You were in love with him. Hargrove's expression confirmed the insight. We grew up together back east. I followed him out here, invested in his ventures, but he only had eyes for her, his beautiful, sophisticated wife. Bitterness seeped into his voice. Even when he discovered her correspondence with another man, he couldn't let her go. Just drove himself harder, took more risks to prove he could give her everything she wanted. And you blame her for his choices, Nathaniel concluded. She knew what she was doing to him. She watched him destroy himself trying to keep her and did nothing to stop it. That's your version, Nathaniel said evenly. I think I'll wait to hear hers before making judgments. Meanwhile, you need to leave now. Hargrove hesitated, measuring his options, then bent to retrieve his pry bar. As he straightened, he lunged suddenly, swinging the iron tool at Nathaniel's head. Nathaniel's reflexes saved him from serious injury, but the glancing blow still opened a cut above his eye. He reacted instinctively, driving his fist into Hargrove's midsection with controlled force. The banker doubled over, gasping. That was stupid, Nathaniel observed, easily disarming the man. Now you've added assault to attempted burglary. Sheriff Mason will be interested to hear about this. By morning, Hargrove was in the town jail, facing serious charges. Sheriff Mason took Nathaniel's statement with professional interest. Been wondering when Hargrove would snap, the lawman commented. He's been obsessed with the Newcomb case since it happened. Kept pushing me to investigate Sarah, claiming she had something to do with Thomas going into that unstable mine shaft. Did she? Nathaniel asked directly. Mason shook his head. Not in any way that matters legally. Thomas Newcomb made his own choices, foolish ones, driven by pride and desperation, but his own nonetheless. And the letters Hargrove mentioned. The sheriff sighed. There were letters. Not what Hargrove implies, but Sarah was corresponding regularly with someone back east, her cousin, from what I gathered. Thomas apparently misinterpreted their nature. Why are you telling me this? Nathaniel asked, surprised by the lawman's forthcoming response. Because I've watched you these past months, Mason replied simply. Seen how you've become part of this community, how you've been with Sarah, he leaned forward, and because she deserves someone who knows the whole story before making up their mind. Nathaniel absorbed this. I need to go to Denver. The sheriff nodded unsurprised, figured as much, stage leaves at noon. Denver's grand hotels and bustling streets were a stark contrast to the quiet rhythm of Whisper Creek. Nathaniel moved through the city with purpose, checking establishments where a milliner might conduct business. It took 2 days of persistent inquiry before he located Sarah at a modest hotel near the commercial district. She opened her room door at his knock, her expression shifting from surprise to resignation at the sight of him. You shouldn't have come, she said quietly, though she stepped back to allow him entry. You shouldn't have left without explanation, he countered, removing his hat as he entered the small but well-appointed room. Sarah gestured for him to sit, taking the chair opposite. Between them lay everything that had been left unspoken. Hargrove tried to break into your shop, Nathaniel said without preamble. He's in jail now, but his accusations are circulating. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. I feared as much. That's why I left, to spare you the association with whatever scandal he managed to create. I don't need sparing, Nathaniel replied firmly. I need truth, about Thomas, about the letters, about why you've been running from your past as surely as I've been running from mine. Their eyes met in silent acknowledgement of the parallel between them, both carrying burdens they had tried to outpace. Very well, Sarah said finally. You deserve that much. She took a steadying breath. Thomas and I had what many would consider a good marriage on paper. He was charming, ambitious, from a respectable Boston family. I was young, recently orphaned, with few prospects beyond marriage. She rose and moved to the window, looking out at the city as she continued. What no one saw was his jealousy, his constant suspicion. His need to control every aspect of our lives. Moving west was his idea, to isolate me from my remaining connections, though he presented it as a grand adventure. The letters, Nathaniel prompted gently. Sarah turned back to face him. Were to my cousin Elizabeth, my only remaining family. Thomas read them without my knowledge and became convinced they contained coded messages to a lover. No amount of explanation would convince him otherwise. He began drinking more heavily, taking greater risks with investments and finally with the mine. And his death was an accident caused by his own recklessness, she stated firmly. He went into a section that had been marked unsafe because a worker had reported seeing a potential silver vein. He was desperate to make a significant strike to prove himself. When the collapse happened, her voice faltered. I grieved Nathaniel, not just for him but for what our marriage had become. Why didn't you return east afterward? Pride initially, she admitted. I couldn't bear to return as a failure, penniless and widowed after less than a year. Then as I built my business, I discovered something unexpected, freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I answered to no one. My decisions were my own. My success or failure belonged to me alone. Nathaniel absorbed her story, recognizing the courage it had taken not just to survive, but to build something from nothing in a community where she was an outsider. In many ways, her journey paralleled his own, though she had chosen to stand her ground while he had chosen to keep moving. Thank you for telling me, he said finally. It can't have been easy to revisit. Sarah studied him carefully. Does it change how you see me? Yes, he answered honestly. It makes me admire you more. The simple statement hung between them, creating a moment of profound connection. What happens now? Sarah asked, vulnerability evident in her question. Nathaniel crossed to where she stood, taking her hands in his. Now we return to Whisper Creek and face whatever gossip Hargrove has stirred up together. I won't have you facing it alone. And after that, her eyes searched his, seeking something more permanent than immediate protection. After that, Nathaniel said softly, we stop running from our pasts and start building a future, if that's what you want. Is it what you want? She countered, needing his certainty. You've spent years avoiding attachment to any place or person. I have, he acknowledged, until I found someone worth staying for. The simple declaration was more powerful than any elaborate profession of love. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she reached up to touch the healing cut above his eye. You were hurt defending me, she observed. I'd do it again, he replied simply, and more. Their return to Whisper Creek 3 days later caused less stir than expected. Sheriff Mason had done an admirable job of controlling the gossip by making Hargrove's obsession with Thomas Newcomb public knowledge. The banker's apparent mental instability had become the focus of town speculation rather than Sarah's past. Spring arrived early that year, bringing renewal to both the land and their lives. Nathaniel accepted Jacob Thornton's offer of the foreman position, which came with a small but solid house on the ranch property. He approached his new responsibilities with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, quickly earning the respect of the ranch hands. Sarah's business continued to flourish. With regular orders from Denver and San Francisco, she expanded into the vacant space next door, creating a proper workshop where she and now 2 apprentices could meet the growing demand. Their courtship proceeded with frontier directness. They attended church together, shared Sunday dinners, and were seen walking through town deep in conversation. If anyone disapproved of their attachment, they kept such thoughts private in the face of the couple's evident happiness. On a warm May evening, as they sat on the porch of what was now their regular meeting spot, the cafe where they shared weekly dinners, Nathaniel finally gave voice to what had been building between them. I've been thinking about something Mrs. Templeton said months ago, he began, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson. About people carrying invisible wounds. Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. We all do in some form. Yes, he agreed, but I've come to believe that those wounds don't have to define our futures. That healing is possible with the right companion for the journey. He turned to face her directly, taking her hands in his. Sarah Newcomb, I came to Whisper Creek intending to leave the next morning. I stayed because of a financial arrangement that made perfect sense on paper. But I'm here now because I love you, your strength, your determination, your kindness. I love the woman who rebuilt her life from nothing, who faces each day with courage. Sarah's eyes shimmered with emotion as he continued. I've purchased land at the north edge of town, he told her. 10 acres with good water and a view of the mountains. There's a foundation already laid for a house, a real house, not a cabin. I'd like to build it for us if you'd consider becoming my wife. Nathaniel, she whispered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just marriage, but roots, permanence, a complete departure from the transient existence he had lived for so long. I know it's not been quite a year since we met, he acknowledged. If you need more time. No, she interrupted gently. I don't need more time. I need you, your steadiness, your quiet strength, your understanding. I love you, Nathaniel Zane, and I would be honored to be your wife. Their kiss sealed the promise between them, not just of marriage, but of healing together, of building something that would endure beyond their individual wounds. The wedding took place in June, a simple ceremony in the church followed by a community celebration that seemed to include the entire town. Mrs. Templeton supervised the wedding dinner, Jacob Thornton provided beef for the barbecue, and Sheriff Mason made a surprisingly eloquent toast to the couple who found in each other what the rest of us are still searching for. By October, their house was complete, a sturdy 2-story structure with wide porches and ample windows to capture the mountain views. Sarah's shop continued to operate in town, while Nathaniel divided his time between the Thornton Ranch and their own small but growing herd of cattle. On cool evenings, they would sit on their porch, planning expansions to the barn, or discussing Sarah's latest business opportunity. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset and marveling at the unexpected journey that had brought them together. "Do you ever miss it?" Sarah asked one evening. "The freedom of answering to no one, going wherever the trail led." Nathaniel considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity," he admitted, "but never enough to trade what we've built." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band he'd placed there. "Freedom means different things at different times in life. There's a kind of freedom in commitment, too, in knowing you belong somewhere with someone." Sarah leaned against his shoulder. "I never imagined finding that kind of belonging again after my parents died. I thought that part of life was closed to me." "As did I," he agreed. "We were both wrong in the best possible way." In December, exactly 1 year after their first Christmas together, they added a new chapter to their story with the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth Rose. As Nathaniel held his child for the first time, the last shadows of his nomadic past finally lifted. This was what his mother had meant about debts that weren't about money, the obligation to live fully, to risk loss for the sake of love, to create family where there had been emptiness. The rampaging bull saloon still stood in Whisper Creek, its wide plank floors still collecting dust in the afternoon sun. But now when newcomers stopped for a drink and asked about local stories, they often heard the tale of Nathaniel Zane and Sarah Newcomb, the drifting cowboy and the determined widow who had found in each other the courage to stop running and start building something that would outlast them both. Their story became part of the fabric of the town, told and retold with the embellishments that come with time and distance. Some versions emphasized the romance, others the financial arrangement that had brought them together. The saloon kept them all, these variations on truth, these testaments to the possibility of beginning again. But Nathaniel and Sarah kept the real story between themselves, in quiet conversations by firelight, in the home they had built together, in the family they created. And that was the greatest freedom of all, to write their own ending to a story that had begun with two people determined to stand alone, who discovered they could stand stronger together.